Hi, and you're very welcome to this COP27 side event. My name is Cillian Lohan. I'm the Vice President of the European Economic and Social Committee, and also an active member with our European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. Our side event today, as you see, is Circular Economy Unlocking the Potential to Combat Climate Change and Biodiversity Loss. And I'm very pleased to welcome some very special guests to join our session today. We will go through initially a conversation with Mr. Simonas Satounas from the cabinet of Commissioner Sinkevicius, and then we'll move through our four panelists, also having some time for questions at the end. I'd also like to remind you that we are using Slido today, and there is the QR code on your screen where you can engage with the panelists and the speakers, ask us questions, and also we will be carrying out some polls on this in order to make this as interactive a session as possible in the spirit that we want to engage with everybody. So the first question, the first poll question on Slido to start our session is: what percentage of circularity does the world need to reduce global resource consumption and greenhouse gases to limit warming to well below 2 degrees? And there's a number of options there. So while I'm having the conversation with Mr. Satounas, I would like you to give your reaction there, and we can discuss those results as we move through the other speakers. And so to begin, Simonas, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this important side of event. And I'd like to kick off by asking you how you think a circular economy will contribute to reaching climate neutrality and halting, and not only halting, but restoring biodiversity loss and making the link between those two important issues. I think you're still on mute, Simonas. So if I could just ask you to unmute.
Yes.
Excellent.
Now I hope now you hear me. So welcome and thanks for having me here today. Absolutely a topic which is important in these days, and it's important that we're discussing, especially in the context of the Sharm-el-Sheikh. So just to start with, according to the report of 2018 from International Resource Panel, we all know that about 50% of total greenhouse gas emissions and 90% of biodiversity loss is coming from the resource extraction and processing. So we cannot get to the point of being in balance with what our natural system can sustain and achieve climate neutrality without addressing the resources and materials and products. Obviously, all these three areas linked, and if you would look closely at our best allies while we're trying to find the recipes to find the climate change, these two best allies would be energy efficiency and renewable energy. And we can see how much they are already linked to the circular economic transition. So let's say renewable energy projects such as photovoltaics and wind turbines can help us bring cheap and clean energy to all European citizens, and not only European citizens. However, they absolutely require raw materials whose extraction is polluting and which we currently are not always able to reuse or to recycle. So Europe is also heavily dependent on the third countries while trying to get supplies of the raw materials. So here, obviously, that circular economy must come and comes into the play. And maybe to mention a couple of things. First of all, it's batteries regulation that Commission has proposed and tabled as a proposal back in 2020. We want to introduce more mandatory recycled content for the batteries that are placed in the EU market. And we need to find solutions that can help us to make secondary raw materials a reliable source of supply. This also should be the focus of the upcoming Critical Raw Materials Act that Commission is working on. So circular economy is also absolutely a key fighting biodiversity loss because thanks to the key role of reducing waste and pollution, which is another angle of that the circular economy can address. So that reducing of the waste or pollution absolutely can restore or help us restoring biodiversity and reducing the need for resources. So in our view, by promoting energy and material efficiency and reducing the amount of waste which is being produced, The circular economy is at the core of helping to address the climate, biodiversity, and pollution risks that we are currently facing. So obviously, interrelations between biodiversity, climate change are nowadays obvious, recognized, and we really welcome how biodiversity and nature-based solutions are increasingly integrated into climate COP, which is happening now. So therefore, it's absolutely important further strengthen these links between the climate and biodiversity communities, and it's good that we're having these discussions today. But I also wanted to ask you, maybe while we are having here a conversation, so where is the broad agreement how the green transition has to be fair, or how can the circular economy benefit all of the society, because the fairness is a key element here.
Yes, thank you for that. It's so interesting, I think, for our audience to hear about the amount of initiatives that are coming from the Commission in this space, in the circular economy space, and how it keeps broadening and keeps developing. And that idea of fairness and just transition is, of course, very important element to it. And I think you've mentioned there one of the keys to it, which is the development of a secondary raw materials market and a space for secondary raw materials. And we know that within this area, that means that there's opportunities for reskilling workforces. There's opportunities for employment and jobs within Europe, within areas that maybe previously have been overlooked or haven't benefited from economic development, or have suffered in recent times. And so there are great opportunities there, I think, within the circular economy principles in order to create opportunities in those spaces to make sure it is fair and that it is just. And of course, we need people to move out of particular industries and move into more climate-friendly industries, such as those with circular economy principles. And so there are opportunities there. Importantly, and I think excitingly, the groups such as the joint initiative between the European Commission and the Economic and Social Committee, the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, shows us that there are loads of examples of this happening already, and it's happening on the ground, it's happening within different sectors, and participation and engagement is probably the key to ensure that we have a fair transition and a just transition. I think there's some very good work happening in this sector, in that space already, that others could learn for. But of course, you also address the issue of biodiversity and the link between the two. And I think one of the biggest challenges has been how to ensure that we have coherence between policies that are aimed at circularity on the one hand, on climate on the other hand, and on biodiversity, and how we ensure all of these can be coherent together and that one policy isn't contradicting the other policy. I know that's a huge challenge, but from your perspective, can you share some ideas on how we can either we have that coherence or how we can ensure that we achieve that type of coherence?
Speaking about coherence, obviously, it's true that for many years it seems that climate, biodiversity, or circular economy communities have worked independently. But hopefully these interrelations between these policies and issues are now absolutely acknowledged, and all the communities, the one that you were mentioning, but also research and innovation and policy communities work together, and they acknowledge. Now, we know that circular economy is a key reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, as I was mentioning, or to adapt to climate change and biodiversity loss. So probably we need to more focus again on reusing and recycling the raw materials for especially these two purposes. On one side, we want to boost environmental and energy security, preserve biodiversity, but also we need to address the air, soil quality, and avoid new dependencies that we can see are coming from or might come because of the third countries and how we use the energy. So these coherences, they're absolutely necessary, and the Commission is working on many fronts in these days, trying to find or to go hand in hand climate change, the packages that was proposed on the climate Fit for 55, but also in a parallel that we are going with the waste reduction, and also we will be working more on the different approach to waste with a really much bigger focus on the prevention, reuse, and preparation for recycling. So this is probably would allow us to move the resources to the other level of the usability and recyclability. So this is less polluting, obviously, and is less greenhouse than the extraction and transformation of these virgin materials. So Commission is working on all three fronts, trying to have a coherence, because these three fronts, they are absolutely impacting each other.
Okay.
And but again, and going back to you, for me, it's also, and probably for everyone, is really important how to increase the circular culture of the entire our society, because many things are starting from ourselves. How to make our world or our minds more of circular culture in order to make our future more sustainable and make these three areas work together. I mean, the circular economy, climate change, and biodiversity. What would be your take?
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, our work within the Economic and Social Committee is about bringing together the different actors in these spaces, civil society organizations, employers, trade unions, and finding solutions by working together and by bringing everybody along with those solutions, so that we have a lot of buy-in to it, so that people are excited and encouraged and see the opportunities there. I think that's probably the key to the cultural change and the behavior change that's required for people to see that there are benefits to this, that it's not a huge sacrifice, let's say, in order to make these changes, that it's something that can be an improvement. We can have prosperity, and we can have well-being, and we can have a healthy environment in which to operate and function in, without having to have a backward move, let's say, in standards of living, or in health, or in well-being in general. And sometimes these are put in conflict with each other. But our panel very much today is about going into some of that detail and looking at people who are active in those particular spaces, members of our coordination group from the Circular Economy Platform, and others who will share with us the real story of what's happening on the ground. So I look forward to moving into the next part of the session, where we will speak with those. And I'd like to thank you, Simonas Satounas, for joining us, for opening this session, and for giving us those very valuable insights into your perspective and your thoughts, and what's happening from a European Commission side in this space on these three important pillars of change that we require. So thank you for joining us for this first starting of the session.
Thanks a lot, and good luck.
Thank you. And we'll move immediately on to the results of the Slido, which we had put up to you. The first question that we had, the poll on what percentage of circularity do we need in order to achieve these goals that we've set. And I think what's very interesting for us to see is that, I mean, these figures can mean different things at different points. You see, a majority of people have gone for 45%. So, some people have gone for 100, some 75, and it's quite an even split across there. And of course, it depends how many people engage with such a poll. But interestingly, nobody has gone for 17%, and yet some of the research is suggesting that itself is the more accurate figure. But there's no real right or wrong answer here, because of course there are a number of nuances in the different figures that we present. And importantly, our first speaker on our panel, Tim Forsland, who's a circular economy specialist at Citra, one of our coordination group members, is going to address some of these issues. Tim, I know you're going to speak to us about circular economy solutions, about tackling root causes of biodiversity and the climate crisis. And Citra also published a very interesting report earlier, and this links to the question we've just been discussing on the poll on Slido. So please, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Killian. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to be able to speak to this topic. And I much agree with the importance of the circular economy and its power in terms of providing that policy coherence that we're really looking for if you're talking about resources or climate as well as biodiversity. So I will share a few things from our perspective at the Finnish Innovation Fund, Citra. So on the next slide, I would just and one more, I would mention that I work there as a circular economy specialist, but Citra is the Finnish Innovation Fund. We're a think, do, connect tank, and we work on a whole range of different topics from democracy and lifelong learning and fair use of data. But we do particularly work on, in a way, providing that policy coherence in the background by looking at how we can solve the crises of biodiversity, climate change, and resource over extraction jointly. So this is really at the heart of our work. And on next, I would mention that as on the next slide, I would mention one of the things that we have looked at is seeing that the circular economy, working with our partners, we've been able to show that you can tackle about half of climate emissions in EU heavy industry. And here I would also mention that you can also look at the same things for biodiversity. We recently published a study, as Killian mentioned, called Tackling Root Causes, where we show that the circular economy can tackle biodiversity loss and climate change at the same time. And since we started looking at this topic, we've seen a whole range of stakeholders from the Finnish Environment Institute, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the French National Circular Economy Institute have published reports on this. And we also see from IUCN and the EEA also coming out with their own reports on the links between circular economy and biodiversity. But if I explain briefly what we found in our study specifically, how far can we get if we transition to a circular economy by 2050? So we see if we cut food waste by half and we use our byproducts from the food sector at the highest value possible, and we shift to regenerative agriculture and forestry, we use clothes longer and we recycle more of them, and we make sure that our buildings, they're designed with less building materials, they last longer, and we reuse and recycle more of the materials. So if you look at these four sectors that have the biggest impact on biodiversity loss, how far would that really get us? So here the good news is that the circular economy can tackle biodiversity loss on its own, and we can get back to 2000 levels of biodiversity already by 2035. And secondly, we see that the biggest impact potential is in the food sector, in particular, thanks to alternative proteins and food waste, which we model. So here is where you have the strongest overlap between powerful climate action and biodiversity action. So this is really, really important. And this has also been emphasized just by the emissions gap report, which highlights the food sector as a particularly important sector. Thirdly, we'd also say that the importance of tackling these crises jointly. So we can also, through the same measures, tackle almost 90% of methane emissions in agriculture. And also when we talk about resilience, the circular economy is really key. So we can, for instance, enable a reduction of nitrogen fertilizers by 30%. So if we zoom in on the next slide on what this actually looks like, if we continue as before, we will continue to lose biodiversity way past 2050. By taking together these four sectors, a circular transition can effectively turn the loss on biodiversity loss already in the next decade. And on the next slide, we can zoom in on these sectors, and we see that it's really in the food sector where you have the biggest impact potential. And it's largely by reducing our resource use, which in turn means that we can use less land, and that leaves room for nature to thrive. More than that, we can also use the area that is under production to drive biodiversity outcomes. So we can use regenerative agriculture and regenerative forestry, and that could provide another 10% of the contribution to our circular economy scenario. So next, I would just highlight three key things for the twin COPs that we're looking at. And in between the twin COPs, we have the World Circular Economy Forum as well. We'll look at this in more detail. So we see that the circular economy can really serve as a tool to tackle both biodiversity loss and climate change. But we need to look at biodiversity loss at a global level, because a lot of our impacts, just like with climate change, are outsourced. So we need to look at reducing the global footprint, the total pressure on nature, besides ensuring that our production is sustainable. Secondly, most of these outsourced impacts, not least, but what we model in our scenario, is due to biomass. So there's just not enough biomass by 2050 if we look at where the demand is heading. So we need to make sure that we reserve biomass for high value applications and long lasting products where we reduce waste as well. And more than that, we also need to ensure that the areas under production, we use them as well to drive regenerative outcomes, which are biodiversity positive. So to conclude, we don't have much time, so we really need to tackle these crises together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So much information to share, and thank you for being so concise. I'll remind our guests that we have a word cloud that we're forming on Slido at the moment. If you go back to the Slido app, and you'll see we have a question there for you on what solutions could tackle climate change and biodiversity, circular solutions. And they've already got some, they can steal some of your presentation there to answer that question already. But equally important is to move on to our next guest, and that is Mairi Taido, who is an educator and an entrepreneur, and you're the CEO, Mairi, of Lomerism, but you're going to talk to us a bit about skills and reskilling the workforce and the role, the important role that has to play in circular transition. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much for your introduction. And then thank you also, Tim, for painting a nice picture right before me of all the necessary changes we need to actually implement. And my question is, who's going to implement those changes? And it's not going to be Animal Kingdom, but it's going to be us, the people. And with that, I do like to bring in the topic of skills and competences and the question if we are skilling people correctly. So we do have to make sure that in addition to legislation and in addition to market enabling conditions, we also have place to kind of bring people on board with circular economy, giving them knowledge and all the necessary skills from systems thinking to adaptability. And having said that, I also like to bring in the point of young people, where they, unfortunately, probably or fortunately, have to deal with majority of their work life with implementing circular economy and also combating the climate change consequences. So with my work for the last 3 years with international partners, we have looked more in depth into the necessary skills and competences for young people for circular economy implementation. And I would like to share a couple of main findings from our work. And I will start with saying that we did also start our work with understanding the status quo in all the countries that the partners were from. So those being Estonia, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, and Belgium, bringing the European context. And what we realized from the young people perspective, that the opportunities to engage in circular economy discussions or even in the implementation are very different country by country. For example, in Netherlands and in Italy, you can already study a whole curriculum about circular economy, where in Estonia, unfortunately, it's mostly 1 or 2 subjects you can take in certain fields, mostly environmental engineering or in design studies. So this already actually sets a whole different starting point for young people, where some enter labor market already with this understanding that, yeah, we're moving towards circularity. I know about this, I have the knowledge, where some in a way have been left for entrepreneurs to train and reskill. Talking about entrepreneurs, we also interviewed 50 currently circular entrepreneurs to understand what makes them want to run a circular business nowadays. We wanted to understand their competences and skills, as well as we wanted to understand what is it that they advise for young people. And we learned three things. First of all, what drives them is very strongly vision. So they understand that the world is changing and that they want to live in a circular vision. So that's number one thing. Secondly, they did emphasize the importance of circular economy knowledge. So you understand the concept, you understand the approach, and you also understand then how to implement it. And thirdly, they emphasized soft skills. So soft skills we're familiar with, like cooperation, collaboration, systems thinking, adaptability, and many others. But what makes it here important is that we do have to understand how to implement those soft skills in the circular economy context. So we do have to keep in mind that we have a generation, like a opportunity of the century in a way to build a generation and generations to come who will have this circular mindsets already, because this is what they will be working on for majority of their life, as I said earlier. But also we have to keep in mind that for a young person who's today 20, it might take 10 or 20 years to even become a decision maker, to become a business owner or a leader of a big company, to make those decisions. So I wouldn't put all the responsibility on young people, because we also need to make changes today. So I would invite to focus also on reskilling today's labor force. And I would invite you to think as well, do I have all the necessary skills and competences to implement circular economy to unlock its potential? And if I don't, where can I get those skills? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayuri. And that's a great question. Great for us to think about it in that way, how we can all improve ourselves a little bit. I think we can apply what you've just spoken about, not only to circular economy, but to our approach to life in general. We should all be trying to get a little bit better at the things that we're not so good at. And certainly in this space, it can help us to move forward. And these kind of sessions are essential for that. And we've talked a bit about material flows and about the problems, the drivers for the problems and the solutions, and now the skills and the training that's needed. But importantly, food production and agriculture, of course, is an essential element to all of this. And I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker on the panel, which is Professor Lushka Bogataj, a climatologist specialized in agricultural meteorology, and importantly, one of the Nobel Peace Prize recipients from the University of Ljubljana. Professor Lushka, I'm delighted you can join us and speak to us a little bit about the impact of on climate adaptation and how to make agriculture more regenerative. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Kilian. Hi, everybody. I'm a climatologist, so I will try to focus on a climatological dimension of the problem. And on my next slide, I would just like to share with you the facts that are inconvenient. We all have to eat, but on one side, food systems shape societies. And some people say we are what we eat, but unfortunately, they also threaten the vital ecosystem services. It's not just about climate change, it's also about air quality, fresh water, soil formation, pollination, and above all, climate stability. And many people are not aware, actually, that the global food system is the largest cause of ecological and climate crisis. And also, if we focus on agriculture, which is of course important part of the food production, yes, agriculture is clearly linked to the loss of biodiversity. So especially deforestation, about 80% of deforestation can be contributed to agriculture. And of course, meat production, animal agriculture always played an oversized role, especially because of using so much land. On my next slide, maybe we can remember how the greenhouse gas emissions are connected with a different part of the food production. So extremely important is land use, because we use land we transform land. Crop production has about 27% of share of the whole greenhouse gases coming from food. The biggest part, of course, is meat production, livestock, and fisheries, about a bit more than 30%. But also we transport food, we package food. So all this supply chain also contribute 1/5 of the problem. This is not the all inconvenience route. On the next slide, we can actually see how wasteful is the production. But let me first mention that there's a circle. On one hand, food production impacts climate change, but climate change also reflects on food production, and in view of many people, actually climate change increases hunger. It's about production itself, which is lower. Also, extreme events can prevent access to the food, and also the quality of food is important. But with change carbon cycle, we also can count on decreased nutritional value of the food. And of course, food waste is one important problem. And with the climate change, unfortunately, food waste increases. On the next slide, we can also see when the circular economy comes in, because how we produce food today is still a linear system where we lose a lot of material. The linearity is something that is causing problems. And we all know that food production relies on extracting finite resources, phosphorus, nitrogen, oil. And these things can be tackled by more circular approaches. And if we talk about damage, we are talking about million and million hectares, 12 billion hectares just degrading of arable land, which is crucial to be preserved for the next generation as well. So yes, on the next slide, we can really see that we need a change. We need to rethink essentially not just the food production, but entire food system. It's not just farming, it's also the processing industry where we have huge losses. And it's also, we have to rethink what we do as individuals, how we shop, and also we should tackle our diets as well. So one important thing is that we completely designed out the food waste, because this is something that is easily done actually. Also, we can produce different food byproducts with the using of circular economy principles. And all the previous speakers already mentioned regeneration and regenerative type of agriculture. So on my last slide, I will try to summarize all the advantages or the strategies that are offered by circular economy. So regenerative agriculture means that we could use more agroforestry, that we could use cover crops, permaculture, biodynamics. They are very not so new science, but still not known enough in many parts of the world. We should shorten the supply chain by using more local production, especially in the cities. We should enhance the urban farming systems and also reconnect food production with cities, because majority of people live in the cities. I already mentioned reducing waste, but it's also, there are many strategies like increasing food product shelf life, or we can use mobile application for unsold food recovery. We should include restaurants and all the initiatives that are zero waste oriented. Extremely important and also not known enough with the people is the valorization of the waste by products. So we can extract, for instance, biopolymers, which can replace synthetic materials from food waste. So this is something that can improve also the cost benefits ratio. And let me conclude with the last. We should close the loop. So biomaterials can return to the soil and using microorganisms. So then we can really reproduce what nature, Mother Nature does or did for centuries. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Luška. Very interesting information, and of course, putting food in the spotlight. And as you said, food processing, of course, is a very big part of that, and the needs for what we need to do from a consumer end, a role there. But of course, all food production starts with the agriculture and farming community, and I don't think we can discuss these topics without having a representative from there also. I know that Niels Peter Norring is chair at Copa Cogeca's Working Party on Environment and Climate, and also a member of our coordination group on the circular economy for the European platform. And I also know, both from my rural community in Ireland that I live in, but also from my work on the Economic and Social Committee, how active farmers are in this space in trying to be part of the solutions to move forward and face the challenges of change that are there. So Niels, I think you're going to speak to us about alternative circular solutions in agriculture, and also have a video to share with us. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Here from the pavilion in Sharm-el-Sheikh, and I think we should start with the video, please.
Ara mateix estem al Delta de l'Ebre, un entorn natural d'un gran valor ambiental, protegit per la Unió Europea i que forma part de la reserva de la biosfera. Concretament estem en un dels camps que conrea la nostra cooperativa des de fa aproximadament uns 100 anys. Som l'única cooperativa que controla tota la producció, des de l'obtenció de les llavors fins a l'elaboració i comercialització del seu arròs. Estem satisfets de poder tancar tot el cercle de producció i poder reutilitzar els nostres subproductes. Un 20% de la nostra producció es converteix en clofolla d'arròs, un subproducte en un valor molt residual i que acaba sent un excedent per a la cooperativa. És aquí on hem creat aquest projecte d'innovació, que és l'Organisais, aquest projecte innovador que tanca tot el nostre procés productiu creant un substitut del plàstic, que és un dels problemes més importants que tenim avui en dia. Gràcies a l'ajuda d'Ivan Ganduixel, creador del projecte, i a més de 10 anys de treball, hem aconseguit transformar la clofolla de l'arròs en aquest producte que substitueix el plàstic. Organises una innovació que contribueix a mantenir la sostenibilitat del nostre planeta.
Thank you very much again. And circular economy in agriculture is about agri-food waste, as well as about producing more with less and reducing negative discharges to the environment. If we look at our agri-food systems, there are opportunities at all stages to further improve circular economy. However, this requires the right political framework. This is key, since efficient agricultural production, producing more with less, is about essentially to fulfilling agriculture missions to feed the world. Our European farmers and their cooperatives produce high quality food, feed, and energy supplies for our European citizens, as well as citizens around the world. However, the latest climatic and political developments are posing severe challenges to the sector. We have, for example, seen a political pressure on the livestock production, with little consideration for the role that it plays in ensuring a well-functioning circular economy through side streams such as organic manure. A shift to circular agriculture should not be seen as a return to past practices. It should rather be seen as a way to farm on less land by making use of scientific advances, innovation, and new technologies. Public policies with focus on achieving sustainable use of natural resources can encourage farmers to adopt new technologies in areas such as drip irrigation, precision agriculture, rainwater harvesting, and crop productivity. We also need to have sharp focus on research. Agriculture research can also enable farmers to green transition. There's a big need for improved access to technology and skills. These technologies and skills can be facilitated through international cooperation for technology transfer. In conclusion, agriculture contributes to the circular economy, to biodiversity, and to overcoming the climate challenge. We have to produce more with less in the whole chain from farm to fork. This requires the right political framework, research and development, the transfer of technology to farmers, and global dialogues and partnerships. COP27 calls itself the COP of implementation, but it is not the COP that will implement. It is us, and we will do it in the agricultural sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niels. And I remind people again about our Slido, that's active and that's open. And having heard from all of our panelists and my guests today, I'd like to draw attention back to the results of that Slido SoundCloud that we have produced through your interaction. And you can see it there appearing on your screen now. And some of the words, of course, that pop out are regenerate nature, and food, of course, as our last two speakers have touched upon how important that is, but also nature-based solutions and finding industrial symbiosis. So for my guests, I wonder if you look at those results, and if you see something that you wish to comment on, then please indicate so and turn your microphone on and say a few words on it. But what I would like to maybe draw attention to is the fact that there's a real mix there between areas where individual action is required and where it looks for behavior changes and the responsibility put onto the individual, whether it's for diets or for how we purchase goods or how we behave. And then there's other things that are more systemic changes that are required. And I'd like to ask you for thoughts on the fact that we talk about system change. You know, we talk about, to address the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, that we need a systemic shift. And circular economy, in my perspective, has come along in the background almost and started offering solutions to these things, almost as a business proposal that has transformed as we've started to implement it into a very practical solution that can change how these different systems work. And I wonder if any of the speakers would like to comment on that, if there's something that they see that is more about creating that system change that helps us connect biodiversity, climate, and our behavior as economic operators within a circular economy. And I'm looking to the floor to see if any of you are interested. Mairi, I think you're first to unmute, so please.
I can start, and maybe I can put out here like an unpopular opinion immediately. And that's something I feel with the systemic change proposals that come from circular economy or climate change point of view. They're often people are often afraid of it because they're like, whoa, we need to regulate something. But they keep forgetting that we got to this point in the society also because we've been regulating things in the past. We agreed that, for example, English is going to be a universal language. It was a decision. We agreed to drive on the right side of the road or on the left side. We have traffic signs, etc. So I believe also that this is a decision. It's a political decision, like a regulative decision that could help us. So I believe that what helps us in this transition is that we decide that some certain things are not okay anymore. So I believe that the direction or the push can come a lot from regulation, because in the free market context, the market is never going to regulate itself against like growth or against of goods of free movement or producing whatever we want. So I'm looking at regulation that could come as a point that shows us direction and says, this is not okay anymore.
Okay, interesting. And I think Tim also has expressed an interest to say a few words on that. Perhaps not, maybe I'm misreading your body language, Tim, but Niels, I see your finger has gone up. So Tim, first, if you would like to say something, please, and then Niels after.
No, thank you, Killian. I think there's two things that come to mind. Firstly, see on the slide over there, there's the interest in food and regeneration. So I think it's just firstly looking at, from a systems perspective, what are the key pressure points? So we need the data there, and we have it, and we know where we really need to focus a lot of our attention, and by really making a shift with regenerative agriculture and halting food loss and waste and shifting to more alternative protein sources. So we know what we want to do, what we need to do. So that's the first part. But secondly, there's no easy way to just sort of, there's one policy that can do this. I think from Finland's experience, Finland did the first national circular economy roadmap in 2016 under Citrus leadership. So that was really a process of bringing together about 1,000 different people across Finland, from labor unions to universities of applied sciences, as well as businesses and policymakers, and to kind of create a vision of a circular economy and what that would mean, and finding concrete steps at what do we really need to do. So there's no easy way out of this, but I think it goes to show that at least in a relatively small country like Finland, you can start to do these things. And even if we didn't have the policy, it wasn't just about policies, but in just 2-3 years' time, Finland went from having essentially no courses on circular economy to having the highest numbers of circular economy learning offerings per capita. So it doesn't change the full system, but you can still bring a few bright minds together. You can accomplish a lot. So I think that is what we need to continue to do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. And it's important to have that hopeful message as well. I think not only in the context of circular economy and our session here today, but in the context of the COP and the whole COP climate movement, to know that these solutions are possible, to keep us working towards them, is an essential message. And Niels, you're there on the ground in Egypt at the moment. Your feelings on that, please.
Yeah, I fully agree that we have to look at regulation, that it wasn't mentioned, but if we look at the two big challenges, biodiversity and climate, we're talking about today, we can solve these very easy. We'll stop producing agricultural products and convert the areas to nature, but then we don't have the food production. So let's agree that we have to have less agricultural land in the future. And that will mean, because we have to have the food production, we have to produce more intensive, more effective, more with less, and with less emissions on the area we have agricultural production on. And we have to focus at the same time on circular economy, biogas, pyrolysis, food losses, consumption patterns. Also, it's very important, especially in the developed part of the world, where we can eat a little bit less meat and eat some more plant-based products. But we have to have focus on the circular economy because we can achieve a lot there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niels. And maybe a word from Professor Luschke as well. And before you speak, I just wanted to share with you that I think also it's not just intensive production, and I know that we're very short slots here for people to answer questions, and so there's much more nuance to some of the things being said. But certainly, just to add into the mix there, the idea that extensive production and getting people back on farmland that has been abandoned, which in a lot of parts of Europe is a big problem, and farming in a way that is more traditional, but using the best of technology that's available, and therefore introducing circular elements to that, is also, I think, part of this whole matrix of solutions. As Tim mentioned, that there isn't one single solution, and I know, Niels, that you're not suggesting there's one single solution, but just to add that into the mix. Professor Luschke, please, before we go to Alberto for our closing.
I'll be very short, but I really agree that education is the key. And you are very lucky at Finland, for instance, that if you have these possibilities, but in many countries in European Union, practically there are no courses for students to attend. So maybe the role of European Union should be to perform a sort of directive that this kind of education should be present in all member countries. And some additional thought, there are so many things we have to think about. Yes, circular economy, but in my view, in the heart of circular economy is also sharing economy. And sharing is something, the value, human value that has been lost in all this race for economic growth, for competitiveness. You know, there are some things that has to be changed more globally, not just in European Union, before we really give circular economy a chance.
Okay, well, I think that's an excellent message to start to bring our session to a close, and thank you for that. And I think what we've seen certainly within the Economic and Social Committee in the EU is that by putting people at the centre of circular economy has been essential in all of the things that have been successful. And I think it's the same for climate action or for addressing biodiversity loss, that when we remember the human element to it and the reason why we're pushing for all of this, and the fact that we need to balance people's livelihoods with their need to be fed and clothed and have rich, fulfilling lives, it's a real challenge when we're trying to address all of these problems and still maintain all of the advances, the positive things that we've made from the systems that we have. So I'd like to thank you all for giving us your time today and your perspective. I'd like to remind our viewers and those who are watching this back that on the EU side events platform, there's the opportunity for people to interact with all of the speakers on that platform that you're registered with in order to attend today's session. You can continue to interact with speakers there, and I know that a lot of the slides that were presented and the words that were said will have stimulated a lot of people to have further thoughts, and they might want to follow up with you directly on that, or with me or the organisers. And also we'll be posting this, which has been recorded, on the CESP platform. That's the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. Also, which many of our speakers are members of the coordination group of that, and as I say, is a joint project between the ESC and the European Commission. So having said all of that, and having enjoyed your different interventions today, I'd like to give the floor to Alberto Arroyo Schnell. Alberto, I know you're from the IUCN, of course, and you've been listening to our conversations and our interactions in the last hour. A big topic to try and sum up or give a closing on in terms of climate, biodiversity, circular economy, and importantly bringing these together when sometimes these very subjects are dealt with in different silos. But please, we give you the floor in order to give us some kind of closing as to what we've heard and what we've learned today. Alberto, please.
Thank you very much, Killian, and thank you everybody for being with us today. I have the honor and the challenge to close today this session, and it was a very intense discussion and it's not going to be that easy. As Kilian was saying, I work for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, so we have a biodiversity focus. But it makes perfect sense that I am at a climate change and circular economy discussion, because from the biodiversity side, as it came out from the discussion today, is one of the fundamental links. Because actually circular economy is a fantastic tool. Like with every tool anyway, we need to ensure that we use it adequately and that we get the maximum out of it to achieve the goals for which it was conceived. If you remember at the beginning, we had this poll when we were kind of challenging or being a bit provocative with this 17%. I want to make sure that it's clear that this is a kind of provocation, because this is obviously much higher what we need from circular economy. And actually, if we can get a conclusion from that poll is that we all believe that circular economy should be a widespread tool. And secondly, that we still need to increase our knowledge, which by the way, should not stop us from action anyway. We are here anyway at the Climate COP27, as you know, and today is the Adaptation and Agricultural Day. There are thematic days, as you know, in every day during the COP. And this is spot on, as one of the key messages that we are having from this discussion today is the fundamental role of agriculture and food in the circular economy and its interface between biodiversity and climate. This is something that came out very clearly, I would say, from the presentations from some of the distinguished speakers we had today, Tim from Citra, also Professor Lutzka, that was highlighting, of course, our need for food, but also how the food system is the largest threat to our environment, and at the same time, food production is actually quite affected by the ecological crisis. But now thinking in solutions, when we know the challenge, as it came out again from the discussion today, there are some areas where the circular economy can very much help, including for, of course, sustainable production, such as regenerative agriculture that came very much out in the context of the World Cloud, addressing food waste and using nature-based solutions, something that was very much mentioned also by Simonas Satunas from the Cabinet of Commissioner Sinkevicius, advancing new technology, also as Niels was telling us from Copa Cogeca, and of course to improving the skills of especially young generations, as Mary was telling us from Low Marys. At the very end, one of the key challenges that we are facing is how to achieve together all the different targets we have. And when I say together, I mean it in two ways. On the one hand, at the same time. So how to coordinate the biodiversity targets with the climate targets, with the food security target or the socioeconomic targets. This is a challenge that we live also in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, as we know very well. And one of the solutions that has been mentioned a number of times is the need to have some coherence in terms of the policies, something where we still need to advance. But together, I was also meaning it in a second sense, meaning all of us, all of society, how we can make the famous transformative change we aim for really happen. And education has been mentioned as one of the key solutions that we can use in the future, but also regulation has been mentioned. And here I have to remember some of the things that were very different in the not so far past. I am old enough to remember when there were people in some of the parliaments, national parliaments, smoking inside the Congress. That's something that sounds crazy nowadays. Maybe that will be the same view we'll have about some unsustainable practices that we have now and should change in future. At the very end, the circular economy, if we implement it adequately, can be a very helpful tool. Here, actually, initiatives such as the Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform that also Kilian was mentioning, of the European Commission and also of the European Economic and Social Committee, are fantastic to pull together all the different stakeholder views and to have discussions there to ensure that we can advance. Because at the very end, all these issues need to be considered together if we are to achieve our targets, including biodiversity, and which is the reason why we are in IUCN also following this in detail. Actually, also speaking about thematic days that I mentioned before, in 4 days, the 16th of November will be the Biodiversity Day in the context of the Climate COP, which is good, again, to ensure that we have these links established. And more important, in 1 month, we are going to have the next COP, the COP15 that was also mentioned before. We are now in between COPs, if you want, the COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we will agree there on the Global Biodiversity Framework, the plan to achieve our biodiversity targets by 2030. Where I hope that the circular economy will be recognized as a great tool to help us in this purpose, as it is now happening actually in this COP through events like the one that we are living now, and where I hope also that I will see most of you again. So to conclude, we are living very important times. Very relevant discussions for our future are happening at the very moment. This is the time to prepare the needed transformative change. And the only way to do it is working together to ensure that such a great tool as the circular economy really plays its role adequately to achieve our climate and also our biodiversity goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto.